When conversations about love and sex arise, sometimes people only hit the surface.
With us, we're going to dive deeper.
I'm Anthony Brinson.
I'm Elle Fromm. And this is the Going Deeper podcast. Team, I'm going to be honest with you guys. We are recording this on Good Friday. Anthony and myself are both Christian. This is a little strange for us, but obviously, number one, religious beliefs shouldn't overly impact your job. But two, I don't think that love and sex topics should always, if at all, run contrary to sex and love, or to religion. Good Lord. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's an interesting thing to think about, because usually I know a lot of people have trauma when it comes to love and sex because of religious experiences they've had, mm-hmm. or things they've been told. Like purity culture is a big thing in a lot of religious communities. And I also don't want to make any generalizing statements just about religion. It's such a vast topic that, mm-hmm. yeah. Like, I think to say religion is against love and sex is way too vague, which is not the point I was trying to make. Mm-hmm. But it is a little strange to be doing this today.
Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that until Elle mentioned, and I was like, wow, this is Good Friday. Mm-hmm. And so anybody who celebrates Easter, or if you are religious and consider it as Resurrection Sunday, then happy those days. Mm-hmm. And also I was telling Elle,
and even if you don't, or if you celebrate a secular Easter, or you don't celebrate it at all, have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Also, last Saturday, I think it was last Saturday or last Monday. It was Monday. Last Monday was Holi, which is a Hindu holiday and festival that is celebrated, I think, even by people who might not be like very observant mm-hmm. Hindus. Like it's, I'm sure there's a secular aspect to it. It's the one with the colors. Do you know that one?
Not really hip to it, nope. Oh, that look like Mardi Gras. That's what reminds me of.
A little.
The aesthetic of Mardi Gras.
I'm not super familiar. It's known as the Festival of Colors, Love, and Spring.
Oh, wow.
And there's religious significance to it that I am not aware of, so I would hate to misconstrue that. But I was joking with a friend of mine who celebrates it, and I was like, oh, it's Holy on Holy Week. I was like, look at that.
And it's so crazy as well. I was telling Elle, I had an Uber driver who I was we were talking a bit, and I had asked him, like, are you celebrating the holidays or are you celebrating Easter? And they were Persian. That's how you'd say it, Persian. And they were saying, like, well, no, I don't celebrate Easter, but it's my New Year. And I'm like, oh wow, I would have never known that if I didn't talk to this Uber driver.
Well, because unfortunately in America, a lot of the religious assumptions are automatically Christmas or, mm-hmm. or Christian holidays. Mm-hmm. That's what I meant to say, but Christmas still works. Like, this year, here at MSU, exams are scheduled during Passover.
Really?
Yeah, and students who observe Passover they are the ones that have to reach out and seek an exemption, and an alternate time will be scheduled for them. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it was done that way to begin with is not something that would happen on a Christian holiday, in my opinion. And the State News has done coverage on this topic that you should all check out. But it's very... Yeah, our assumptions of what religious holidays the larger country as a whole observes aren't just based on personal experience. Because I went to Catholic school, my spring break was always called Easter break. It was always the week of Easter, versus here, ours was a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. But it's not just those personal experiences, because even people who are not Christians know about Christian holidays. They know what Christmas is. They probably, I don't want to make generalizations, but they probably know that Easter celebrates the resurrection of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Whereas I don't know much of, I try to educate myself, but I don't know much about holidays in other religions or cultural holidays. Like, it's something that I learned for myself, and not something I'm expected to know the way that non-Christians are expected to know in America about Christian holidays. And for those of you who aren't watching but are listening, I did put the second expected to know in air quotes. Mm-hmm.
And with all that being said, it'd be good if you'd want to transition into the disclaimer before our topic.
That was just our little chit chat. Today's topic is birth control. And at the start, we want to clarify we are not medical professionals. Our discussion today does not constitute any form of medical advice. We just want to bring awareness to this, talk about some myths, the different forms of birth control. But if you or anyone you know wants to go on birth control, is on birth control, has any questions about it, ask your doctor or your primary care provider, like a nurse practitioner, or it's like my PCP is a nurse practitioner. This is meant to start a discussion, but it is not medical advice. Please keep that in mind. Thank you.
And also, just a general disclaimer of the podcast that just in case we have another chit-chat moment, these are the opinions of Elle and I and the Going Deeper podcast and not the opinions of the State News.
That's very true. This is something, back when we first started the podcast, I always wanted to do an episode on, but we picked this week to do it. I don't know, because we picked this week to do it because of a recent pop culture news event. Olivia Rodrigo, the pop star, for those of you who don't know who she is, I'm personally a big fan. She just released the deluxe version of her second album.
Really? It's
amazing. She has a song on there called Scared of My Guitar, where she talks about being scared to write songs because she knows that it'll express her real feelings. And she says, she's saying, I can't lie to it the same way that I lie to you. And then she says, so we'll stay together because how could I ever trade something that's good for what's right?
Wow. I'm also a Olivia Rodrigo fan, but that is impressive.
That one's my current favorite because, not because I relate to it, to be clear, but I like songs about feelings that people usually don't talk about, like more icky type of feelings. Like she has a song called, on her first album, my favorite song on the album is Happier, where she says, she's talking about her ex and his new girl, and she says, I hope you're happy, just not like how you were with me. Like, I want you to be happier, but not as happy as we were. I hope you're happy, but don't be happier, is the line in the song. So I like songs where it's like, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that way, but we're going to express it because sometimes people do feel that way. And she also has a song on there, a lot of her songs tend to be a bit on the sadder side, but she has one on there called So American that is about her new boyfriend, and I think it's a very cute song.
Oh, she has one? Oh, wow.
Shout out. Her deluxe album is so good. It has that, and it has, what's that song called? Oh, Girl I've Always Been, which has sort of a folk type song inspired sound. It reminds me of the songs from the new Hunger Games movie a little bit. Anyway, Olivia Rodrigo, she's I think she's on tour right now. I know some people, she just came to Detroit. Some friends of mine got to see her. It's fine. I'm not jealous. But she sparked some controversy because at a Missouri concert, to quote this Variety article, Olivia Rodrigo makes free emergency birth control pills available at Missouri concert after the state narrows reproductive rights. That is by an Ethan Schanfeld from Variety, because we cite our sources here. I heard about this on Twitter, or X initially, and I thought it was really interesting because I think it's something I'm personally in favor of, is more accessible access, my lord, access to birth control, because we're going to talk today about, we're going to do a vocab section on the different types of birth control, then we're going to go over the pros and cons of some, then we're going to talk about barriers to access, then we're going to tie it back into, obviously, the idea of sex and love, although it's pretty clearly related. That's today's outline. I usually don't share the outline, but it's on my computer, and today's might be a little shorter because we're heading home for the holidays this weekend. So the controversy it sparked, in large, some people were like, she as a pop star has no right to be doing this to begin with. A couple people were upset because she has a younger fan base, and they were like, children don't need to see this or be exposed to this. And I'll say it again, although it doesn't, in my opinion, bear repeating because we've discussed this before. I believe in sex education from a young age, appropriate sex education in the sense of sex education when you're very young can look like just knowing the anatomical name for your body parts and knowing what they are so that if, God forbid, something does happen to you, you can identify it. So if people were saying, like, her fans are too young to see this, first of all, young people have sex regardless of whether or not you tell them to. The question is, are they going to do it safely? And that's not even young people. That can be older people. That can be literally anyone.
I agree.
Like, Did you know that there's a large, we talked about STDs a couple weeks ago. STDs are very common in nursing homes and among elder communities as well.
Wow.
We just tend to think of them as something that only affect young people, which is not true. So, yeah, and also in my opinion, if your child is old enough to go to a concert by themselves, then that's what they're going to see. And if you think they're young enough for you to accompany them, then that's just, it gets passed out and like you take it and they say like, what is that? And you either explain it to them or you say like, oh, this is something you don't need to know about until you're older. But I don't think I think a lot of these constitute personal opinions, and none of that is enough to stop a pop star who is an adult from trying to educate her fan base, because she started a Fund for Good. It's an initiative that helps to women or AFAB people seeking reproductive rights and freedom, and also education and stuff like that. That's an initiative she takes as an adult. It's her concert. She's allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was personally something it was very cool to see, because I often wonder, although women or AFAB people 20 years ago had more reproductive rights than we do now, which is very sad. I asked myself, like, oh, what would happen if a pop star had done this 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. And it's possible they have, and I just don't know about it. But I think it might have received a different response. So it's cool to see young people. Like, I think she was very brave to do that, personally. Yeah,
when Elle first told me about this, I was really, like, I lit up, like, wow, that is incredible for her to do, because especially as a male representing person, or just somebody who identifies as a man, it's always been weird to me that, like, condoms are free or given out a lot of times, but things like birth control or Plan B, you have to, like, not only pay for it, but they be expensive sometimes. So it's very mind-boggling to think of, like, the difference in accessibility in terms of, on one end, yeah, if you want to go do it, just wear a condom. But if on a woman's end, from what I see sometimes, is like, yeah, make sure you take this responsibility. You go get this. So it's just be weird.
Because we were talking about this, and to be clear, when people say birth control, there are so many things that could mean, mm-hmm. which is our next section is sort of like vocab. So, and I want to be clear, if we skip one, or if there's one that you know that isn't addressed, there are so many different types of birth control. I'm just going to say it's possible we might miss one. But the idea is, like, I'm putting this in quotes, like, natural birth control would be like abstinence, fertility tracking, the pull-out method, stuff like that. And a lot of these are often done in conjunction with one another, because mm-hmm. birth control doesn't always mean preventing pregnancy. We tend to think of it that way. But if you are trying to get pregnant, you probably would engage in fertility tracking mm-hmm. and then have unprotected sex when you are ovulating, or just before you're ovulating. I don't really know all the science of it, to try to increase your chances of pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And then we've got physical, which are like condoms, dental dams, non-hormonal IUDs. Chemical would be the pill, the patch, implants that go in your arm, chemical IUDs, and then surgical would be like having your tubes tied or having a vasectomy. But another thing I think it's important to address is, despite the contrary and varied personal opinions people in this country have about abortion, scientifically, many people consider it to be a form of birth control. Mm-hmm. Because the pill that Olivia Rodrigo gave out, it wasn't birth control pills. It was an emergency contraceptive that many people refer to as Plan B, but similar to like Kleenex and tissue. I think that's actually a brand name.
Wow.
So an emergency contraceptive that helps prevent pregnancy when taken within 72 hours of unprotected sex, which many people know about the existence of. If you don't, that's what it is. It's available at like CVS, grocery. It's like $50. Plan B, I know it's like $50.
Yeah, which is insane. That's expensive.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Yeah.
I think it's, but also, yeah, so there's a lot of different types. There's a lot of different feelings people have. And we're not going to talk about abortion too much today. I think if we were to do that, it would probably be a separate episode. Mm-hmm. But I will say that there is so much misinformation. Anti-abortion rights activists, which AP style, which is what journalism uses. We don't use the terms pro-life or pro-choice or anti-choice, which is what some people use. We advocate for using the terms pro-abortion rights and anti-abortion rights. But sometimes anti-abortion rights activists will show images that are not accurate. They'll say, like, this is what you're, air quotes again, killing. And it's a picture of, like, a fetus at, like, 35 weeks. Mm-hmm. And that is, like, even states that do have reproductive freedom and laws, like Michigan, thankfully, in almost, I think in every single state, and we can talk about this more if we do an abortion episode, late-term abortions are only done in terms of medical necessity. So what abortion actually looks like can be literally just taking a pill. Either, I don't think it's the Plan B. There's like 2 you have to take. It can be taking a pill and a clump of cells leaves your body. That's what it is. The only time that 35-term fetus that gets used a lot is being like surgically removed is in terms of medical necessity, and in my opinion, 10 times out of 10, not something the mother or the AFAB parent wanted. That it's usually a tragedy, and it only has to be done because of their health, and they're devastated, and the last thing that they need is somebody yelling at them and calling them like a murderer. So we're gonna, like I said, it's usually just you take, like, I think there's 2 pills that you take, and then a clump of cells leaves your body. That's what it is on a scientific medical level. And it is my personal opinion, again, me personally, not that of the state news, that those, when we make legislative decisions, that's what they are based on. Facts, science, not personal beliefs. So, yeah, but we're going to keep our focus on, like, preventative forms of birth control. Or, like I said, birth control can be when you're trying to have a baby, which wouldn't be preventative, but you get the idea. Because most of these are ways to prevent pregnancy, or in some cases, prevent STDs and STIs, which we did an episode on. So, yeah, how many forms of birth control would you say you are familiar with? Like, which ones have you heard of?
The pill, the shot, and then the IUD.
Condoms, probably, right?
Oh, when I think of birth control, I don't think of condoms.
Really? Because I consider that that's the one I think of first.
Wow, that's pretty surprising. When I think of condoms, I think of, well, I guess if we break it down to a pregnancy preventer, which would, I guess, in theory, be birth control. But
that's what I'm talking about. Because even when people say birth control, they don't always mean the same thing.
Yeah, I usually always think of more so the woman or the AFAB person when I think of birth control in terms of, like, they're taking birth control, which is kind of makes my point in terms of how things are really structured from the man's side and the woman's side. But like, the main one I usually think of is the pill.
Yeah, hang on. Okay. When I said hang on, I wasn't being rude. Also, I don't know if the microphone can pick this up, but today's Good Friday. I am fasting. If you hear my stomach growl, but it's happened twice, and I don't know if it's been. I didn't hear it on my headphones, but like if it did happen, I'm sorry. So I saw this online somewhere, and I was telling Anthony about this before the episode started. A person who is assigned male at birth, AMAB, and hasn't had like a vasectomy or something like that. And this is up until like sometimes death. Within 40 weeks, which is the gestational, that just means pregnancy, gestational period for humans, for AFAB people, an AMAB person, if they had sex every single day with a different AFAB person for 40 weeks, could get 280 people pregnant. In that same 40 weeks, an AFAB person can have one child, one pregnancy. And yet the majority of birth control is targeted towards AFAB people. And I think it's because they carry literally the burden. We are the ones who would have to be pregnant and carry the child. And make those very, very difficult personal decisions about whether or not that's what we want for our life, yada, yada, yada. So the responsibility tends to fall on AFAB people who are usually cisgender women, and women are already marginalized. Mm-hmm. So,
and just for clarification, you weren't referring to the child as the burden. You were referring to
the physical experience of pregnancy. Mm-hmm. That is a debilitating in many ways and cases, and for many people. Because, again, if we do a more deep dive on abortion, people say, like, oh, just give it up for adoption. You still have to be pregnant.
Yeah.
Like, and it's very magical for some people, but it's also horrible for some other people. And usually we only talk about the beautiful parts of it and not, like, constantly getting up to pee, the fact that you might need stitches, not being able to sleep. Like, almost every part of your health is impacted.
You could have stopped at just having to go keep peeing. That alone to make get me irritated and give even more respect to women. Like, y'all deal with that for 9 months.
Not to mention,
Lord,
AFAB people, in the majority of cases, can only have children between their first period and menopause.
So,
which is usually menopause, usually for a AFAB person is in their 50s. But it can be earlier, it can be later. Mm-hmm. Like that time I got 2 hot flashes when I was a junior in high school and convinced myself I was going through premature menopause. I wasn't. Because even premature menopause is like your 30s. Mm-hmm. And I was totally fine. I just had 2 hot flashes and blew the entire thing way out of proportion. Very on brand for me. I like having the cameras because I like having somewhere to look.
Just look at out of
But that ends at menopause. Mm-hmm. Whereas AMAB people can produce sperm many times up until death.
Oh, we can?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
I didn't know that. Thought it just stopped at some point. Like the tank just empty.
No, that's what it is for people with uteri.
Wow, that's insane. That's the plural of uterus. Her vocabulary. Shout out Elle's vocabulary.
You can say uteruses. It's just way more fun to say uteri.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a form of
It's so much more fun to say.
And then like the other word where it was I think a G for pregnancy,
gestation.
And then she said the D word. It was something.
Well, I found out that it was gestation because I saw something that was like elephant's gestational period is 3 years.
Oh,
and I was like, what does that mean? So I Googled it, and elephants are pregnant for 3 years.
That is oof.
Doesn't that sound atrocious? Yeah. But I suppose, their bodies are different. How long? I'm Googling this just to make sure.
While you're doing that, I also had a question. If you would know, or if you could Google it quickly, you said the period from first period to menopause, what's the youngest AFAB person could, or just people who experience periods could experience a period? And then the latest of menopause?
Okay, when you say the youngest, there are... Like, it's like how people say average or like average and mean.
I didn't want to say average.
Well, the thing is, there are cases where it can be as young as like 7. Like, but they're very, very
I was
rare.
going to say 8 off guess, but I wanted to make sure. So 7 to, and then what's the latest menopause? You said 50s?
No, the latest would be much later than that. Let's see if we can find the latest recorded. Oh, wait, is that song copyrighted?
I don't know, but
I don't think so. I hear it all the time.
I was gonna start singing the song, but I'm like, I don't know about copyright, so I'm just humming the tune. Shout out the Weekend if you can peep the song I'm humming. But
yeah, that's the average. I'm looking for. According to MountSinai.org, which is a hospital, it says. As early as age 40, as late as the early 60s. But I'm sure there is a case, like the latest recorded case could be much higher than that, like 70, would be my guess. But still, like, personally, I got my first period when I was 12. Mm-hmm. And I don't know when I'm going to reach menopause, obviously. But it tends to be generational, so it would probably be around the same age that women in my family do.
Just to address
which I don't know offhand, and also I don't know that I would feel comfortable sharing.
Just to address it, what is menopause?
So menopause is, AFAB people are born with all of their eggs in their ovaries. And again, I'm sure there are medical instances where that's not true. But most AFAB people are born with all of their eggs in their ovaries, and then you release, usually, release one every 28 days, or that's why periods aren't always once a month, but they're usually once a month. You release one a month, and then eventually they just run out. And that's menopause. Oh, and then you don't have any more periods.
Also,
but menopause is more than just that. That's the main thing, but there are other like hot flashes. There are other physical symptoms that you go through.
Another thing, I'm pretty sure this relates to periods, but what is PMSing?
Premenstrual syndrome.
Which is, like symptoms before you get your period?
We should do a period episode. This birth control idea is just giving me so many other ideas. So we're going to, it's premenstrual syndrome.
Okay, cool.
It's a physical and emotional symptoms that start 1 to 2 weeks before your period, according to medlineplus.gov. So yeah, we might do a period episode, or because we want to do an anatomy. That would be an anatomy of sex, and periods are not sex, obviously. Yes, but birth control methods, the ones that people tend to know, are probably the ones we're going to discuss today, because science is always advancing. I'm sure there are new stuff coming out. I mean, I would love to see birth control targeted towards AMAB people for the reasons I just mentioned. You know, the whole 240 people that could be impregnated
280
versus it's 240.
Well, no, it's 40 times.
It was 280.
Yeah.
Can y'all? I'm not good at math. Or remembering, because I Googled it. But if you want, like, if you're listening to this and you want, like, to see the stuff that you can go to Planned Parenthood, and they have, like, literally, this is what I do more research than just this, but they have,
show the camera if you can, too.
Can I? I don't know if that would come across.
Oh, okay, cool. All right.
Because like sometimes you try to show a screen on camera and it lights up so bright that you can't see it. But like it will tell you even before you click on them to get more information. It says how effective it is, what the cost is, and how long it lasts. And those are the things that we were going to talk about, which are reversible, which protect against STIs, which are like a one-time use, and the accuracy margin. So those of you who have seen Friends will know that condoms are not 100% effective. Oh, that's what it took me a minute to recognize it. Yeah, they're like, on average, again, according to Planned Parenthood, 87% effective.
Which one specifically?
Condoms.
Okay.
So.
Is that 13%? Well, you probably wouldn't notice off the top of your head, but I wonder if that 13% is involving, like, if it breaks or rips or...
Yeah, because a lot of this is, like, the birth control pill is a phenomenal example. Its effectiveness is if you take it every day. Or I think there's, like, a day you don't take it. I haven't personally tried it, so... but, yeah, a lot of I assume the effectiveness, I wouldn't know for condoms, but I know for... birth control pills are based on how well you apply it. Because if, like, you put a condom on wrong, it might not work. Although usually if you put it on wrong, you can tell that it's on wrong. Like, it's kind of obvious, and then you're like, is this inside out? And then it's just like, why? Maybe we should just watch this movie. Like, sorry. I also, I wear contact lenses, and those can be, do you know you can put your contacts on inside out?
Very recently, I learned that.
It's the most infuriating thing in the world, because when you're trying to look at it to see if it's inside out, it's kind of hard to tell. So I think condoms are probably the most well-known form of birth control outside of the pull-out method, abstinence, that kind of stuff. Because I think it's because of cost, and often they are given out for free. Like, I feel like... I'm trying to think of where I've seen them. I've seen them in dorm halls. I have seen them... Like, we are on a college campus. I feel like I see them a lot.
My freshman year, I think it was my freshman year, they had an event where they quite literally just gave out condoms.
Yeah.
There was a big table full of them, and it was like, here, and it's like, I was walking by, and it's like, here, take a condom. I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah, if you've been to pride parades or celebrations, they have them there too. There's lots of... They're quite easy to get. You know what? I'm going to look something up. Because
Type.
I wonder how old you have to be to buy them.
There's an age limit? Wow.
I'm saying, is there? You do not have to be 18. You should not get carded for buying condoms, and a clerk cannot legally refuse to sell them to you without looking at your ID. And if they ask your age, you do not have to answer. Because that's what we were talking about, how young people are going to have sex regardless. And hopefully it's consensual and within, I don't want to get into this, but like 2 or 3 years of their age. I would say 2 years, but yeah, so you don't have to be 18 to buy condoms. Whereas I think the reason condoms are so well known and often chosen by people is they are a one-time use, they're cheap and very easy to get. And hopefully, at least where we live. I mean, obviously, that's probably not the case in other places. But of all the stuff on this list, I think it's the easiest because some of these things you need prescriptions for. And I think the birth control pill has gotten much, much better in that respect where you don't have to see a medical professional to get it anymore.
Really?
No, you can get it. There's lots of places you can get it. And I mean, hopefully your primary care physician is aware that you're taking it and you know the side effects and the risks and stuff, but it's becoming more accessible. And then but the things to consider are like an IUD, for example, is a very controversial. Let me rephrase that. You don't need to edit it out, but an IUD is an often discussed form of birth control because it is, in terms of preventing pregnancy, the most effective. Again, outside of abstinence, because I told you I'm not doing that. As in, I'm not talking about it, but I'm also not doing it personally.
An IUD is the form of birth control where it's inside, right?
Yeah. It looks like a little T. Mm-hmm. There are non-hormonal IUDs and just physical IUDs. So the idea is that it just stops that's what it does.
I actually didn't know there was a non-hormonal version. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Look at here. What are non-hormonal IUDs? It's a tiny device. It goes into your uterus.
Well, I can't see your computer, but what does IUD stand for? I can't read it.
Intrauterine device. And I know that because one time I got it confused with IED, which is a bomb.
Oh.
Yep. That was pretty... It wasn't like in front of anybody embarrassing, but it was like, wait a minute. Which is improvised explosion device. It's like a dirty bomb, or like a jerry-rigged bomb, basically. And I got that confused with IUD. Which is funny. Tiny device that's put into your uterus to prevent pregnancy, long-term, reversible. This is from Planned Parenthood. One of the most effective. Yeah, but it lasts for 3 years, usually. So it's not like, whereas a condom, you have to use every time. This is, you do it and you probably don't think about it often until you have to get it replaced. This is for AFAB people. I said it goes in the uterus, so I hope that was implied. But the reason that it is talked about a lot is because depending on where you are and it's a medical procedure, where you go to get it done, it's very painful. Because this is the case for a lot of medical things that only affect AFAB people. Endometriosis science, lots of things like that. There's not a whole lot of, and there are more. I don't mean to discredit individuals who have done incredible work in these fields, but there's not as much information about it as we know about other conditions that affect everyone. So, I don't know if you know this, but do you know what the fastest funded drug in the world was?
What was it?
Viagra.
Wow.
More than cancer research, more than,
I didn't expect that.
Well, it makes sense.
What's your source, or how do you know that?
What is my source? That's a good question. Drug in history. Team, I think. Wait a minute. Was it not? Y'all, that's going to be embarrassing. I feel like I've definitely heard that, though. Hang on. If it wasn't the fastest, which, oh my God, thank you for calling me on my source. It's definitely up there. Here we go. Also, I think Viagra is a brand name. There are other, you don't have to have diagnosable erectile dysfunction to, take Viagra. But, I want to say ED medications, but, you can also just get those honey packs, from the gas station.
Didn't you? Are you the one who told me that
Here we go.
Band-Aid is a brand name?
No, but is it?
I think it is.
You know what they call them in England?
What?
Plaster.
Ooh.
No, that doesn't make sense to me because I think of... Well, obviously it doesn't make sense to me. Okay, this is what I meant, team. I don't... Fastest funded might have been incorrect. What I meant is that it was one of the fastest approved by the FDA.
Okay, all right.
There we go.
All right.
On March 27th, 1988, I'm on the history.com because it does the This Day in History.
A lesson in journalism.
Yeah. Okay, its massive success was practically instantaneous. The first year alone, the $8 to $10 pills yielded $1 billion in sales.
Wow.
The impact on the pharmaceutical and medical industries was enormous. So that's what I am trying to say, is that it gets a lot of attention, it makes a lot of money, it gets approved fast, it gets funded fast. So the reason that IUDs get talked a lot about is because depending on where you live, which clinic you go to, stuff like that, you might not get either topical or any other form of anesthesia. So it can hurt a lot when you get it put in.
Mm-hmm.
It happened to somebody I know. I almost said who has requested that I not talk about them on this podcast. And it was incredibly painful, and it was just a really negative experience for her, and she ended up having it removed. And honestly, I don't even have to say one person because I know multiple AFAB people that's happened to.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the reasons that somebody might choose not to use an IUD, but people might choose it because it is so long term.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very effective in preventing pregnancy, but it does not. Yeah, it's 99% effective if placed correctly. But it is a medical procedure, whereas... No, you don't need to cut that out. I don't mind. Everybody stutters. Whereas, like, using a condom every time, you get them at the gas station. Like, it's not the same, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The birth control pill and the patch are used on a schedule. The shot is also used on a schedule. The implant, I feel like this is recent. Like, I remember the first one I heard about, the brand, was Nexplanon. It hasn't, I don't think it's been around a very long time. But I knew somebody in high school had it. It usually goes in your arm. And there are horror stories about it, like, moving. Like, for those of you who watch Chicago Med, that was a plotline on Chicago Med 2 weeks ago. It moved to her heart.
Oh, Lord.
They even said, but, like, one, that's television. Me saying I don't want to spread a misinformation and then bringing this up, that's television, and it's because it was placed incorrectly even within the context of the show, and I think talk to your doctor. Obviously, most of the time, you will be fine. But it's low maintenance as well. I don't know how long it lasts. I don't think it lasts as long as an IUD, but the Nexplanon is fairly recent, or the implants, that was just the brand that comes to mind. There are more and more fertility treatments coming out. I think especially now with the Dobbs decision that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, hopefully we will see, I mean, it's possible we will see an increase on legislative crackdowns on preventative birth control methods. Hopefully we see an increase in birth control science as a whole. So barriers to, I feel like we've talked about which one, the most common ones, which protect against STDs, which are condoms, and I think internal condoms do as well. Which of them are one-time use, and then the general accuracy. And I think when we talk about these things, it's more of a discussion. I know I love to list and research, but I'm not going to list all of that information to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather get your take on it and just talk about it in general. But one of the things I wanted to specifically discuss was not only stigma, but also misinformation, because birth control has a huge problem with misinformation. Chemicals exist in our body regardless. Taking a pill or medication always accompanies discussions like that. And it's not to say that that type of hesitance is always bad. Like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, you should be aware of what goes into your body, I think, 100%. But that as a borderline statement is something that I think people should talk to their doctor about a lot more. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I have a question for you, too. Do you think it's going to actually, or do you think they're actually going to make a male birth control? Like, do you think it's going to actually be produced? And
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. I do. I couldn't tell you the timeline, but definitely with the overturn of the of Roe versus Wade, I think hopefully we will see it soon. Yeah. Yes, I do. What's that? There's a quote that's if men, and the quote says men, but I mean AMAD people, if men could get pregnant, there would be clinics on every street corner like Starbucks. And that's what I was saying. Imagine. Even though AMAD people can cause more pregnancies over the same period of time, AFAB people are the ones who bear the, like I said, when I say bear the burden, I don't mean the potential of a child. I mean,
as we hear our lovely employees in the
that's so funny.
Co-workers.
What they're doing is yelling for the elevator, because we instruct people to go down the stairs because the door that's right next to the podcast room is so loud. It's the loudest door I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, and
it's loud even when somebody isn't recording. You're like, ah.
Yeah, it picks up.
It also beeps when somebody comes in because of the security system. So we encourage people to take the elevator instead when we're recording, because that noise doesn't get picked up. But people yelling for the elevator just got picked up. That was funny. What are you gonna do? I've said and a lot today. So yeah, when I say like I don't want chemicals in my body, I don't mean that is a terrible assumption or thought to have. I just think that is a statement that has to be investigated further by the person saying it and their doctor. Like that as just a reason, and then you don't do anything else. I think is unwise, because you should be aware of the chemicals that go into your body, and the birth control pill and other birth control methods do have side effects. I'm not trying to say that's not true. I saw a recent post. It was 2 women making their boyfriends read the full list of side effects for birth control, and it's like it looks like an ancient scroll, because there are side effects and there are important decisions that have to be made by the person taking birth control pill. Just my example here is about the pill, and their healthcare provider. But there is a lot of misinformation. So I would encourage anybody who wants to be on the pill or any other form of birth control to speak to their partner. I assume if you're on birth control, you have a partner. But also, that's another very common misconception, that all birth control is only used for preventing pregnancy or for sexual reasons. And that is not true, because the birth control pill and other methods can help regulate an AFAB person's menstrual cycle. There's lots of different reasons that people go on birth control. So when I said I assume you have a partner, that was maybe not my best assumption, but since this is a love and sex podcast, we're talking specifically in terms of birth control as pregnancy prevention and STI prevention. But yeah, that comes with the stigma portion, because misinformation and stigma usually go hand in hand. The more stigma there is about something, the less people want to ask about it and talk about it and seek expert sources, and therefore that stigma keeps them from getting the truth, which leads to misinformation. So they're linked. If you're listening, not watching, I'm doing a linking motion with my hands. But I think stigma comes... One particular form of stigma I've seen is that when somebody wants to, for example, go on the pill, depending on how old they are, they're seen as like fast, or like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. Like a lot of stigma from birth control is literally just the same stigma that accompanies sex.
Even though I clearly know what you mean, could you explain to the audience what you meant by fast, the term?
Fast means like promiscuous or slutty. Just lots of slut shaming terms we all hear anyway. Yeah, so we talk about sexual the entire point of this podcast is to combat the taboos that accompany talking about sex, because these are topics all people should be knowledgeable about, in my opinion. And if not knowledgeable, then be aware of and be willing to talk about. I don't think everyone in the world would be willing to have a podcast about it. I think that's definitely true. I think there are people that in your life you might not want to talk about this kind of stuff about. But I don't think it should be as shameful and as weird to talk about sex in a healthy, safe environment as it is. So the same shame that accompanies birth control, the same stigma, it comes from the shame that we have about sex, particularly AFAB people have about how it, like, purity culture, which is the idea that having sex, whether that's penetrative sex, oral sex, anal sex, like, obviously it's sex as an idea means many different things to many people, somehow devalues you, and it's particularly targeted towards AFAB people and women. Like the idea, it is literally the exact definition of objectifying, because it often compares women to objects. Like, nobody's going to want gum that's already been chewed. Did you just compare me to gum?
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, why would you want a used car? Again, did you just compare me to a car? That's I'm a person.
Yeah.
What? And it's targeted more towards women than men. So what has been your experience? Like, when you say you think birth control, you don't really think of condoms?
No.
Huh. What barriers to access? Price, level of medical depth. Like I said, an IUD is more of a procedure, and also getting your tubes tied or getting a vasectomy. Those are... getting an IUD doesn't count as a surgical procedure, but getting your tubes tied and getting a vasectomy both do.
Mm-hmm.
So barriers to access, price, prescription needed / medical level, and stigma. What are your thoughts or experiences with that?
In terms of the stigmas that I've heard about birth control?
Sure. Any barrier to access. Like you were talking before about why is Plan B so expensive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be one. And then I've also... I've dated a partner before who was on birth control, and it was a conversation between us and then them and their parents in terms of the effects that birth control could have, in terms of...
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of times when AFAB people take birth control, it may add on weight.
Yes, that is one of the side effects. It can be as weight gain.
And that has been one of the main concerns in terms of the people I've been in contact with who have decided or not decided to be on birth control, in terms of the potential effects on their body.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know if you know this or if you want to share, were they hesitant about gaining weight from a health standpoint or from a body image standpoint?
I don't know an answer for sure, but if I were to take a guess, it would be both.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an invalid feeling at all. That's incredibly common. Okay.
And also... another thing that the reason why I mentioned or it was intriguing when you mentioned the fast aspect is because that's also another thing I've heard, and I'll be less frank and say closer circles in my life, in terms of like why would the young lady be on birth control if they're having sex, or if they're not having sex, why should they be on birth control? And
there are many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It regulates your cycle. I'm, again, not a doctor, but there are so many reasons to be on birth control, and unless you are someone's medical provider, you have no business asking them that.
Yeah.
So birth control and sex education, if we are probably going to wrap this up soon.
Mm-hmm.
But to a bit of a personal story, are interesting topics for me because I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but when I was growing up, I was never given the sex talk. Like, by anyone in my life. That is an expectation that falls primarily people with heterosexual parents on the mother for daughters, or I assume, does it fall on the father for sons?
It's a good question. It varies, because I relate in terms I didn't get the sex talk until I was like in college. Yeah. So
I took health in high school. That's where I learned most of this, if not just on my own. But the only sex talk I was ever given, I had periods explained to me, but I don't think that's the sex talk. Sorry. Was one talk in 8th grade. And I went to a Catholic school, so it was abstinence-based. And my mother telling me, don't get pregnant. That was it. And I have talked, I don't think my mom listens. No hate to her, but I can understand why she wouldn't want to. I've talked with her a lot about this. I don't want to say, like, no parent is perfect. So it's not like, how could you do this? You know what I mean? But it would be a lie to say that that hasn't affected my understanding of my own sexuality and also just my health. Because I think I've mentioned a few times before being in pelvic floor therapy, when people don't know what's going on with their bodies, they don't know when something is, air quotes, wrong or abnormal. Or, like, this is something I would have, the reason that I probably will talk about a little later on this podcast, that I'm in pelvic floor therapy, I didn't even know that there was something, quote unquote, wrong. I had no idea. And if I had these discussions and had, I don't love saying that, if I'd been exposed to this kind of stuff and it were a more open discussion in my household, then I could have sought treatment for this sooner, and it would have affected my life and my relationships less than it has now. Mm-hmm. So my personal feelings about birth control, it doesn't benefit anyone to not talk about it. It benefits the people who don't want to talk about it, how comfortable they are. And one person's comfort should never come before someone else's health.
Mm-hmm.
Ever.
I agree.
The consequences can be so severe and so difficult. If you, for example, if somebody were to not talk about birth control or give the sex talk at all to their child who, let's say the child is AFAB, that child gets pregnant when they're 14, 15, somewhat considered like taboo ages. I'm a big fan of this, the phrase, I don't support teen motherhood, but I support teen moms, because the idea is historically, sociologically, not one that benefits many people, but those people need support, so talking down on them doesn't really help. But the consequences in that situation could be that you are then raising your grandchild, mm-hmm. or your if the AFAB person is cisgender, your daughter has to deal with that. And you don't know how involved the father of that child is going to be. Mm-hmm. You don't know if that child was conceived consensually, mm-hmm. the effect that's going to have on that young woman's life, her career prospects, her finances. That's what's at stake when we don't talk about birth control. And like I said, that is just one example. There are so many. That's the one I think that is most common. That's what's at stake. And you're going to weigh that worst case scenario, let's say, against the fact that you don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. Really? I fail to see how that would ever take precedence. So that's why I was excited to talk about birth control today, is because it's not something I am used to talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's, as with this podcast and Anthony and I, we enjoy talking about these topics.
Mm-hmm. And especially as someone who wants a daughter in the future, it's important, or I feel it's important for me to have these and listen to these type of conversations to be as knowledgeable as I can. Yeah,
because I think heterosexual couples, heterosexual parents, some fathers, not all fathers, I have been very fortunate. I think I've told somebody this before and they were like, what? I would feel more comfortable talking about birth control with my dad than I would my mom. Mm. Like, my dad even said, like, if you don't feel comfortable talking to your mom about this, you can always talk to me about it. Like, that is kind of a rarity for people with heterosexual parents. Usually it's the parent who is the same gender or sex that they feel more comfortable talking to. But there are, I know, a lot of fathers who don't think it's their responsibility. They're like, that's the mother's job. And that's up for those parents to decide together. But I am not a big fan of that, because it's your child. And just because you might not have the same anatomy that they do, and just because it's a bit of an uncomfortable subject, doesn't mean that they shouldn't feel safe telling you things.
I agree.
I'm cooking today.
On fire, man. Listen.
So, yeah, if you want more information about birth control, you can head over to PlannedParenthood.org or talk to your healthcare providers. I'm sure there's lots of other websites. I feel like Planned Parenthood is just one that people know. Mm-hmm. Stay informed. Why am I turning into, like, this is just advice now. But stay informed. I think if this is something that you want to know more about, then you should get into it, research it. It's a fascinating topic. Like, we've been recording for, oh my gosh, like 45 minutes. We got to get home.
Right. And
I have Easter to celebrate.
Same. And quietly shout out my dad. He called during this podcast, and I definitely had to hit decline and text him my bad, because and I don't know if it can vary in all communities, but especially in the Black community, not answering the phone or sending them straight to voicemail, that's almost a death sentence. So with that being said, we go get out of here right after the disclaimer again repeated. A, we're not medical officials ourselves, and B, the opinions that we may share on this podcast are of ours, not of the state news.
Correct.
And with that being said, you got one more thing to say?
Yes, I was going to say I declined a call from my dad today. He called me I am not kidding, exactly at 3 p.m. on Good Friday. And then he texted me, and then I responded, and I was a little rude, and then I felt bad. But yeah, that's our wrap up today. If you have any questions about birth control, comment them. Let us know. If you as always, let us know what you want to see talked about in the future, and
hit that subscribe button too.
Oh my God, so true.
And with that being said, we're always going to take a deep dive, but sometimes it's good to come up for air.
This has been the Going Deeper podcast.